It's great to be here. It's nice to start this day hearing from Annie Philbin, who was one of the first people I got to know when I moved to LA 12 years ago. And I have been able to watch her not just transform this museum, but really transform the cultural landscape of Los Angeles by listening to artists and taking their lead. And I've been thinking about that in preparation for this panel as we are introducing here some new faces of arts leadership in Los Angeles, new to their current positions, that is. And thinking about how the institutions in Los Angeles, as Annie pointed out to me early on, are young institutions, and for that reason, filled with opportunities that, as opposed to they're young institutions, relatively young institutions. For example, we have two museum leaders here who are leading new museums altogether, and I'll introduce them right now. Jaime Manné is the Deputy Director of the Marciano Art Foundation, which opened to the public in spring of 2017 in a renovated Masonic temple on Wilshire Boulevard. She oversees all collection acquisitions, foundation programming, education outreach, and exhibition management, including artist installations like the very wild and woolly installation by Jim Shaw. That was the debut installation there. And next to her is Allison Agsten, who has been the director of the Main Museum, which is a non-collecting, artist-centered institution in downtown Los Angeles, and she's been that director since 2015, even though the museum itself is still very much under development. They were able to open up a space last year they call Beta Main for the beginning of an exhibition event performance program. And she's just announced plans to take the entire institution, not just the occasional wall label, bilingual. And that's something that I hope we can discuss during the panel. And then next, Allison is George O. Davis, the Executive Director of the California African American Museum in Exposition Park. In addition to leading the museum, his direct responsibilities include strategic planning, budget management, and outreach development to Exposition Park officials and other partners. So very political position, it sounds like. During his tenure, CAM has begun fulfilling its mission to examine African American art, history, and culture in new and exciting ways, including the presentation of more contemporary and emerging artists, and attendance has more than doubled. So I welcome our panelists today and hope that Rachel will be able to join us, traffic willing. We have, a very accomplished group of panelists on stage, but I didn't want to spend too long going through individual bios. Instead, I thought I would start out by asking them to introduce their own careers a little bit. And very specifically, I want you all to dial back the clock exactly 10 years. If you could tell us, just to give us a sense of where you come from, what were you doing professionally 10 years or personally too, if you want to add that. What were you doing professionally 10 years ago? And how, if at all, has that prepared you for this position? Because I think we'll see that we have some leaders here who did not rise through the curatorial ranks of assistant curator, chief curator, museum director in a very traditional manner. So I'm curious to hear from each of you. Where were you? And what brought you to this point? If you could give us a sense.
I was 23 10 years ago. I just want to thank Agenda for having me here. This is very surreal for a kid from LA who grew up coming to the Hammer Museum and coming to see talks on this stage. So this is very surreal and special for me right now, and I just want to thank you all for having us. 10 years ago, I had just graduated from grad school with a master's in art therapy. Which I obviously don't really use right now. I got a job. I moved to New York City looking for art therapy jobs and had to pay rent. So I started working in a gallery that I had interned at one summer and moved on from that gallery to Paula Cooper, where I was for almost 3 years. that's where I was 10 years ago in New York, poor, living in Chinatown, but having a great time.
John Jorini and I, the famous John Jorini from the Getty, were just talking about this because 10 years ago I was doing the work that you guys are doing. I was director of communications at LACMA, and I was just saying to him, I'm not because I do not have total self-belief in my work, but I'm always just sort of waiting. Like maybe at any moment somebody with the long cane is going to go do and like drag me off the stage because I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know I don't know how I ended up starting a new museum. And this is a mystery to me as it might be to you guys. I don't really know how it happened. It's really in large part because of Anne Philbin, who gave me a chance at a very unusual curatorial role. And not only do we owe our institutional ethos in so many ways in Los Angeles to Annie, but I owe so much in my career to her. She's an extraordinary woman and really in so many ways that put me on the career path to where I am now.
Good morning. 10 years ago, I wasn't 23. Probably my oldest daughter might have been 23. I was a senior vice president Technicolor here in Los Angeles. Technicolor was going from film projection to digital cinema, and they were also getting into the broadcasting business around the world. And I call myself back in the day techie with a tie. So I was a technical operations executive setting up cable networks around the world. And I've been kind of, went up through the food chain of a cameraman. I was a disc jockey and kind of got into the executive level and all that. And just realized that I was on a lot of boards, but I didn't really feel like my service really wasn't fulfilled because there was so much you could do on a board. So I wanted to be more actually involved and have a second career, a second act. And so that was the beginning of my journey about 10 years ago, trying to figure out what that looks like and how that would be. And it was some challenging times because you have a brand on your forehead when you do the same thing for so many years. It's hard sometimes people see you a little differently. So that's where I was 10 years ago. And but by the way, I want to say thanks to Anne also, and thanks to the event. When I first got the job, she was kind enough to invite me to the Association of Museum Directors Conference. I met a lot of really good people there, and has been a good sounding board for me through my relative new journey as a director. So again, thank you for allowing me here to be on the panel.
She introduced you to 10 people?
I think my plan is to meet 30 today and just knock it out. So that's I met about 15 so far. So I think I'm well on my way here.
And Rachel, this is perfect timing, actually. I just started the panel. I'm going to just introduce Rachel Moore, President and CEO of the Music Center, leading the $65 million company that manages the Music Center campus and also programs Grand Park downtown. In addition, she oversees the acclaimed dance series Gloria Kaufman Presents Dance at the Music Center, other programs designed to introduce new audiences to the performing arts, and the center's multifaceted arts education initiatives. Glad you could join us.
Well, appropriate to the performing arts, it was a theatrical entrance.
Theatrical entrance, you got it. And the question that I started off with was just to say that I'm introducing you by your current roles, but just to give us a little bit of history so we get to know you better. Where were you professionally 10 years ago? And, if it's not obvious, how did that prepare you for your current position?
So 10 years ago, I was the CEO of American Ballet Theater, where I ended up for 12 years, which was a leap, as it were, because many, many years ago, I was a dancer in the company. So I went to Washington and up and down the Eastern Seaboard, and it was really wonderful for me to be at ABT because I was able to serve as a bridge between the artistic community and the business community. And what's been wonderful about that experience bringing here is obviously dance is something that the Music Center is very focused on, and ABT has performed here many, many times. But because ABT is America's national ballet company, and we served as an ambassador internationally for 75 years, the cultural civic piece was a big part of my previous job, and I believe that it is a huge part of my position here and how we want to frame the Music Center going forward, is that we are a resource to everybody in the county, not just the few in the White Castle on the Hill. We are really looking to break down the walls so that there's accessibility for regardless of who you are, where you come from, what financial background, that you feel welcome, and that part of sort of the civic pride of the Performing Arts and the Music Center to LA, I think is, there's a corollary with the work that I did at ABT.
That's great. Yeah, I think we should jump in kind of right about there. I want to ask each of you to pick one kind of leading example of a project or initiative so we can get into some degree of specificity about these walls that are coming down around us, where you are trying to reach into a community or, near or distant. But, one example of an initiative where you're reaching beyond your institution's walls, and how is it going so far?
Well, we're in a little different bucket. We're a culturally specific museum, and our museum has been around since 1984, and it, like a lot of museums, skewed toward an older demographic, I would say 50 plus. And a lot of those people were really the pioneers of the local civil rights movement, the African American arts, trying to differentiate the art on the West Coast versus the East Coast. And the challenge was that we weren't really getting in my kids' generation, let's just say 20 to 40 or something in there, into the museum. And so the big thing for me was, how do we change that where we're relevant to what's going on now? And also, when the museum was built, the city and state has changed dramatically, where now we're getting like 25-30% of our attendance is Latino. So also, how do we make sure that we stick to our mission, which is art, history, and culture for African Americans with a hook on the West Coast, but also still people that are not African American feel comfortable and feel welcome in the museum? And so one of the things I looked at was also having a person that I could hire who really was in that particular sweet spot of where we're trying to go. And fortunately, we were able to hire Naima Keith. I don't know if she's here today, but she became our deputy director, who came from Studio Museum in Harlem, and has really brought that understanding of that audience we're trying to reach, and really going full bore and focus in that direction, which has brought in a lot of different folks. We also aligned the public programming with the new exhibits and new focus. And one of the challenges all along was how the older generation would feel about that. But I think what I've learned is that they're just thrilled to see their kids and grandchildren in the museum, because before it was really a museum for mostly upper middle class to wealthy African Americans who are over 50 for the most part. So that whole direction kind of kind of broke down the barriers of the walls and enabled us to just be more relevant, because in the African American community, a lot of the culture and history is really thought of on the East Coast, and so not really necessarily on the West Coast. So you have a lot of young people who are really just yearning for something with all the issues that are coming with the police abuse and so forth in our country. And so I just felt like we really needed to not just have the same 60s era civil rights people, but to really get it to be more relevant for them. And so that's been working out very well. And I told someone earlier that a huge part of that was for me to not base it on my own knowledge of these people or the speakers, and kind of get out of the way a little bit, because if it was just me, we'd be playing Earth, Wind, and Fire all the time.
So you changed the music, I take it.
Yeah,
you changed the music.
we'd have Earth,
that
Wind,
you
and
play.
Fire. We wouldn't have food trucks. We wouldn't have DJs. So DJs would be playing Earth, Wind, and Fire. Maybe Santana, some other cool songs.
But this raises an interesting question, because I'm hearing what you're saying, and I think you're articulating it very well. And then I'm trying to translate it into what does that mean physically in terms of programs, and I think parties that you're having. You guys have very good parties now, very young parties now. Is that fair to say that you're?
Well, I think you give a church analogy. a lot of people go to church because they hear it's a good choir. And then when they get into church, they start listening to the message. But if you're selling just the message, maybe they wouldn't come to the church. So I think the pure arts people are going to come. The pure history people are going to come. But people kind of on the periphery who aren't sure, you get them into the tent. And then they start going on a journey. Maybe they Google certain things they see. And they because what's happening is when I was a kid, we had something called field trips. And someone paid for them. And even if you weren't from whatever socioeconomic group, you could see and learn about orchestra and go to museums. And a lot of that's been cut back. So a lot of our kids, especially Latino and African American community, have not gone to museum. We have a lot of people that have never been to museum that we're trying to make sure we're not condescending, but they might touch the art or something like that. So we have a little different focus because of that to try to get them in the tent. And they also sometimes, no disrespect, feel that it's not for them. The museums aren't for them. It's for somebody else. They don't really feel comfortable in a museum setting. So I think you have to kind of demystify it a bit to make it feel embracive and welcome. And then you get them in there, they go on their own journey, which might be different directions in how they try to absorb art or absorb history in a different manner.
Maybe we can continue with this theme for a second and then come back to your different initiatives at the museums, but just thinking about how to make the museum more accessible, welcoming, a place that people who don't go to museums might want to go, and what you guys are doing in that direction as well.
Well, I think it starts with the program. From the beginning, it starts with the exhibitions in the first place. I think that you can, since I'm speaking to communicators, you can do everything you can to communicate your museum differently, but frankly, if you're only showing abstract expressionism, it's going to be hard to convince the world that you're doing something different at the end of the day. You're changing the message, but not really changing the work you're doing. And so the work that we show is aligned with how we talk about ourselves. It's aligned with who our city is composed of, which is to say that our program is filled with a lot of people of color. Our program is at least 50%, if not more, women. So we really do everything that we can to talk the talk, and we also really walk the walk. And I think that as a result, our visitors are really they feel a certain comfort level when they come in to begin with, because we do what we say.
It was really important to us to make this collection, this once private collection, accessible to the public. That was the main sort of the main point that was encouraging the Marcianos to open up this foundation. And just like these private collections that are so sort of almost secretive, they exist, but you don't really see them unless you go to the home, or if you happen to see a work on loan in a museum. And it's the same with this building that we are in now. We're in a former Masonic temple that was built in 1961. LA has very little history, and so we felt like it was super important to maintain that history. So, we're getting people coming into this space who are, some of them, yes, are coming for the art, but some of them are also coming just to see the inside of the building. And so we offer obviously our exhibitions, we offer viewings of the collection, we offer our project space, which is currently the former theater in our building, which is a 14,000 square foot space with about 45-foot ceilings, and that's where Jim Shaw is. And so for us, the mission was really to share this collection, to open up this building and this piece of history in Los Angeles to people. I mean, I grew up in LA, and I always wondered what was inside that building. So to get inside finally was really special. The Masons have their own sort of, their own connotations and things associated with that. So that was something that we had to address. We do have a Masonic room where we offer sort of a glimpse into the history of the Masons. But something I think we've done that I'm really proud of is we're open to the public Thursday through Saturday. We're free parking. You just have to reserve online. But Wednesdays were open only to students and educators, and that's been incredibly successful. And educators are very excited about it because they can bring their kids to the space and they don't need to worry about other people being in there. And this is something that they have found doesn't really exist in a lot of other museums or foundations or exhibition spaces, where these kids are made to feel very special and like they are the VIPs. And so we've been reaching out to the LAUSD Charter 1 schools, LA's Best, and we're booked through the end of the year and into next year for school visits for kids from kindergarten up until the art grad school. So I think doing that Wednesday where we are open just to them sort of shows how we're kind of challenging the traditional model a little bit and trying to knock down some of those walls and say, you know, this is for you, and we think this is important, and we want you to share and understand that, you know, this is not just for a certain group of people.
So I want to echo something that Allison said, that I think it starts with the programming. And what we're doing is both breaking down the walls metaphorically and physically. In terms of the metaphorically, we're really focusing on the millennials. So we started a program, many, but this one specifically called Sleepless, where we open up the theaters at 11 o'clock at night and it goes to 3 o'clock in the morning. We have all sorts of different, slam poetry, dance, music, mimes, what have you, all through the theaters with beanbag chairs and cocktails available. And it's a really fun, incredibly welcoming experience for sort of the younger generation. And people sign up online, you pay more when you get at the door, but generally we're sold out. We'll have 200-300 people waiting in line at 11 o'clock at night trying to get in. Each iteration has a different theme and we'll use different theaters, but part of that is the cognitive dissonance of what you think Disney Hall or the Chandler should be and what you experience when you walk in there, because you walk in with a martini and see a beanbag chair and somebody with their jammies on. It's a very different feel than what you would expect. And the demographics have borne out that about 70% of the people are participating are of color. The average age is 35. Really, and we're drawing a lot from sort of the Silver Lake groups as well as downtown, which is bursting with millennials. The sort of physical manifestation, we actually have started something called the Music Center on Location, where we go out across the county. And so most recently we were in Culver City at the Culver Studios, did a full dance performance of an Akram Khan dance, Until the Lions. We built it out in the round, had a very sort of site-specific feel, but further to the west side. Once again, reinforcing this notion that it isn't your grandmother's music center anymore. And so we are welcoming people and engaging people in different ways.
And you call it Sleepless? Is that the?
So the one that we starts at 11
yeah.
o'clock, yeah, that's Sleepless.
I love that.
And as the staff will
It makes me
attest,
think,
they are.
and I mean, I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but in the history of U.S. institutions, you can really see, 20 or 30 years ago, the introduction of these Friday night kind of young visitors nights where it's cheaper to get in, or it's free to get in, or you can bring someone to drink with you for free, and there's some kind of bar.
But we did try not to just simply open it up to our regular programming. The programming had to be something that was really appealing to the millennial crowd.
Yeah, because I felt like that trend kind of came and went too, because I felt like people weren't doing innovative enough things, or maybe it wasn't speaking to their core mission in some ways. So your food trucks, your music, somehow connects back to what you're actually doing at the museum?
Well, at the Music Center.
Yeah, and the Music Center. Yeah, for all of you.
It doesn't connect to what we're actually doing, but it connects to the people that we want to come. So it still connects. And I forgot to mention, we do have a relationship with Art and Practice, Mark Bradford's venture in Lemert Park, where we're doing some public programming there. So I guess that lowers the walls a little bit.
Well, and a number of you mentioned after-hours programming or different hours programming. Is how one, how important is that to reaching new audiences, and then two, how challenging is it from a logistic point of view? I can't, you have some kind of staffing, security issues, I imagine.
We're a staff of 9 full-time people, so it's definitely tough for us. We do make the space available. I've made a point of making the space available to nonprofit organizations, especially arts education nonprofits. So we will do special events or after-hours tours or walkthroughs or dinners in the museum. And that's our way of supporting these organizations, allowing them to use our space to invite their donors and their guests to come and have a sort of different experience. People want to feel special. They want to feel, like they're part of something exclusive, and so we try to offer that. One, obviously, for the students and educators on Wednesdays. We think that that's our primary target, our students and educators, and that's why we do this on Wednesdays. But the after hours, it's tough, but you have to do it. I mean, it's definitely part of running a public space.
Something really fun about making a museum from scratch is that everything is up for debate, from my perspective, with the team that I work with and also with our community. And so in making what we call Beta Main, which is the little germ from which the main museum will grow, we thought, well, let's take some guesses about what we think good hours are for our community in downtown LA. And then if that doesn't work, we'll just change it, which is totally my philosophy with the museum. If that doesn't work, we'll just change it. And I think that we live that to such a degree that the staff is so comfortable with it that there's no repercussions from doing something and it not working, that it's just like, it's a way of being. In fact, when we just went through a logo process with the designer, we made something that's kind of like half-baked looking because we never really want it fully cooked. We want to maintain that essence of Beta where we feel like we can always change things. But back to the opening hours, we thought, well, we're downtown, so we notice working downtown that people are out later, especially in our neighborhood. There's lots of great restaurants. We thought, well, we should stay open till 8. We think people will want to be here later. So for the first, let's say 3 to 6 months, we were open 12 to 8 because we thought, well, this way, or 11 to 8, I think we were. We thought we would be able to capture a lunch, people who were like walking to lunch, and then dinner. And we found that by 7 it was tapering off and people weren't coming in at 11. So when we're open 11 to 7 because our goal is to key ourselves to our community. So that's what we do, except for one night of the month, which is Downtown Art Walk, when we have so many hundreds of people come in. It's like hard to keep that ticker going, and we stay open till I think 10 that night, aside from, of course, programs when we all keep the doors open late.
Well, I think that there are two sort of drivers for off-hour programming. One is very sort of businessy, and that is its capacity utilization. You have these edifices, and you want to be able to use them as much as you can for as many hours in the week as you can. And the second is addressing different audiences. And in addition, since we run the park, we have a lot of evening stuff where we have dance, DTLA dance. We'll have 5,000 people out there doing, disco dancing or what have you on the park and in the plaza. And that can go very late, and then the big events at 4th of July and New Year's Eve. But I think that in terms of trying to activate the space as much as possible, so that no matter who you are, if you're a business person who wants to have a cup of coffee at 7 a.m. and feel like there's a welcoming place that you can enjoy, or at 11 o'clock at night because you're a millennial and that's when you just get started, we want to welcome people with lots of different schedules, but also from a very practical point, I want to use these facilities as much as possible to milk the benefit of them as much as possible.
Historically, we have had evening programmings. A lot of times, I think some of the challenges in getting attendance because of the commute issues in Los Angeles. And then again, with not to generalize, but with an older demographic, a lot of times they're like, do I want to drive an hour on a Tuesday night? I've already been at work or so forth. Where I find the younger people, they got no problem doing that, or they catch Uber or whatever. Also, we're one of the few really nice venues for the African American community. So we do a lot of rentals, we do a lot of high-profile galas and events, political. We had a gala with Beyonce's mom for a fundraiser and a program that they're doing in the North Hollywood area. And then we started a series called Activism Now. We're going to have Angela Rye speak tomorrow night. We had Maxine Waters, who's very relevant with millennials now too. So that has drawn people who might before, because there's only one gallery opening, might have said, I'll go see I'll see the show on a Saturday. The traffic is less. So now, with having more compelling public programming that's very relevant right now, and then also being seen as a venue of pride for the Black community, I think those two things have really helped us. And I always tell people we click everybody. So whether they're museum attendees or rentals, we click them. I don't know if that's the way we should do things or not, but I'm trying to get up the attendance. So a really funny story. We now have the LA Rams football team playing at the Coliseum, and there's all porta potties out there, so they use our restroom. So I tell the staff, click them, maybe. So so they're coming in. Sometimes they go to the galleries. Most time they go, where's the restroom? I go, cool, just So
Is that the secret for doubling the attendance?
well, I didn't include that. I would say tripling, but
Yeah, I mean, I think the Hammer is a great example of how a museum can think of itself as a center for talks and events and serve the community in that way. I mean, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Annie has talked about the Hammer as doing something for LA that the 92nd Street Y does for Manhattan, that level. And so many museums here have followed its lead in a way, really trying to serve, more than one community. We were talking about millennials a little bit, how to reach that different demographic. But one other thing that came up was how to reach a kind of Latina community here, given its presence in Los Angeles, and of course with PST LA, that's been on everybody's mind. And so I wanted to ask you as well if there's something specific you're doing to reach the Latinx community.
Well, you mentioned our, I don't even like to call it a bilingual initiative because initiative is too small of a word. It's a way of being and a way of operating. We announced not long ago that we are doing everything now in Spanish and English. Maybe one day, if we're lucky enough, we'll be able to expand that to other languages. But right now we're focused on Spanish because, as you know, aside from English, this is the other dominant language in Los Angeles. For us, this meant beginning with our social media immediately and right away with all of our press releases. Our exhibitions will have all Spanish and English labels. We're doing bilingual programming, and this doesn't mean doing something specifically necessarily in English and in Spanish. This means doing Spanish language programming, specifically its own kind of programming, bringing in somebody who wants to do, I don't even want to say a workshop because that seems kind of rote, but something a little bit more complex. We did some really incredible, a night of poetry and music that was really incredible. We actually, for our first bilingual program, and we didn't even own enough chairs for that first bilingual program. It was an enormous success.
And so that would have been Spanish and English all night?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
We let the programmer decide what she thought was most important. We come to this with great humility. The curatorial associate that I work closely with is Puerto Rican. She speaks Spanish, and she has been a real guiding force in helping us do this, although we work with outside consultants as well. But, we know that we are not a dominant Spanish-speaking staff and that we have, as with making a museum, we have so much to learn in becoming bilingual. And we let the people that make the programs with us decide the best way to speak Spanish in our space and with our community. And so the event was actually even more in English than in Spanish, but really, really extraordinary to see the response. Many, many, many tears in the audience. I think for people to just feel seen and heard, because, you know, at the end of the day, people want to be seen and heard.
For us, it was really important to, as a new museum, we're not even 6 months old, and so we still are learning so many things every day. But you know, when we heard that the Getty was doing the PST initiative, we right away jumped on that opportunity and had planned to do a PST show as soon as we were able to. That was in line with the Getty initiative. The collection has works by many Latino and Latin American artists, Hispanic artists, and so being part of that and contributing to that conversation was really important to Marciano Art Foundation and to support these artists who we've been collecting in depth. For example, we were able to, Adrian Villarrojas has a beautiful show up at MoCA right now, but we were able to show a sculpture of his in the foundation. It was the first time a major work of his had been shown on the West Coast prior to this MoCA exhibition. So showcasing our Latin American artists. We also have wall text in both Spanish and English for our PST show. We offer Spanish speaking guides, guided tours. We also offer French-speaking tours, and we're hoping to soon offer Korean-speaking tours because of our proximity to Koreatown.
So we are also involved in the Getty's PSTLA, and we're doing a 3-day festival of all sort of Cuban artists and what have you. When we do a lot of work with communities of color, and one of the things that when I first came to the Music Center is we created a new position, the VP of Community Engagement. And I think that the root philosophy behind that position and the work that we've tried to do with the community is that we have to partner with artists from these communities and let their voices drive us to the creation of programming, that it can't be seen as paternalistic or hierarchical, because the artists drive what's really great at what we're doing. And so really listening to the community and talking to a broad swath so that we can really be relevant and respectful. So with the PSTLA, or you know, even our DTLA dance, when we bring in salsa, what have you, one of the challenges is that we don't want to be seen as doing just specific, culturally specific programming. So you bring in a certain set of performances that appeal to the Korean American community versus the Latina or what have you. You need to do some of that when you're working with specific artists, but we also want programming that is relevant broader than that, so that you don't feel like you can only go to some performances versus another. You're only, you know, it's only relevant to you. And so I think it's really going back to the artist and talking to them and bringing their vision of what they think is relevant for what is LA today. And I will also say that another piece of this is we felt that we had to live the values of inclusiveness and diversity institutionally. And so part of that is we now have a board is 30% of color, which took a lot of work and we're very proud of. But we also felt that we needed to change the culture within the institution from every level of staff. So everybody on staff and on the board had, I'm blanking, unconscious bias training. We're really tying our annual reviews of staff performance to the values of inclusion and compassion and community, so that you're not just judged on your task, but on how you execute that task, because I think all of these things are really important in making sure that the institution feels welcoming and is truly relevant to the various communities.
For us, it's a little different deal, because you look at South LA, used to be called South Central, is primarily African American, and it's becoming primarily Hispanic now. And so a lot of the immigrants that came into Los Angeles first came into predominantly black neighborhoods. And so the African American community navigated those relationships probably 30 years ago or longer. So we've always had Latino patrons or people coming to the museum. I think the difference now is after the elections, a lot of people see the similarities in the civil rights movement of African Americans, and there's a curiosity about what journey we went through to deal with that. And that is something I think that really resonates. The other thing is that in a way, if we look at the future of Exposition Park in Los Angeles, where maybe in the future our attendance might be 20% African American and 60% Latino. And so one of the things I did was work with the governor's office, because we're a state museum, to get a Latino on our board. And so when the Latinos come into our museum and they see the pictures of the board, they see someone also that looks like them too. I think a lot of time it's great to do public programming, talk to talk, but if you don't see people in leadership, if you don't see people in the staff, our staff is incredibly diverse. My assistant is Caucasian. I mean, there's just every type of person in our staff. And so I think it's one of those things where you can do programming and then you feel good, people clap, or you're like, is this really truly part of our institution? And one of the things we're trying to do is prepare for the future too. And it's also, to be fair, there's a lot of older generation, which I do understand, who fought so hard for this museum that they are concerned about, will you still maintain this African American mission and focus? So it's a dance and a balance to still have that core. I think the Skirball has a similar challenge, a lot of culturally specific museums, and so it's just something that we want to evolve, still meet our mission, but again, like I said earlier, really have a feeling that different people coming in feel welcome, and that they see some commonalities in our history exhibits or our art exhibits that also resonate to them. And I think that's, so we're being very, we're taking it head on instead of pretending like it's not going to happen. And I think, that the same thing is going with the African American legislators in our community. The districts are changing, and they're doing a lot more things for the Latino community to stay reelected. So we're not going to get bounced out by election, but we have to be very mindful that the demographics are changing dramatically, and what does a black institution look like in the future.
And on that note, I want to thank our panelists for joining us and starting your Communicating the Museum conference. So thank you so much.